You should be seeing a PowerPoint about upcoming programs and salons. Somebody let me know if that's the case.
I see it.
Okay. So 2 weeks from now, we've got another program, this time from, it's one of the part of the Hunts photo that we've had presenters from them many times in the past. This is a presentation on, whoops, I just didn't mean to do that. This is a young man who's going to talk about bridge cameras. I had to look up what bridge cameras are. It's basically intermediate between point and shoot and mirrorless or DSLRs. So it's kind of a beginner photography approach to macro and other kinds of photography. So I think it's going to be interesting. And then the first Wednesday in April is our first in-person only salon meeting for a long time. You just got a notice from Jill about the deadline being the 15th and the assignment is Windows. Also, because this is our first in-person only meeting since COVID, the print competition resumes, and I'll be talking about that. And smartphone photography as a new category in a bit. Last time someone asked about the details about the print competition and I couldn't remember, so I got my act together and got the some of the details down here in the PowerPoint. In addition to submitting up to 4 or 5 digital images, you can submit 2 prints. They can be color or black and white, doesn't matter. Minimum of 8 by 10. They should be mounted, but the mounting, the total size, including the mounting, should not be greater than 16 by 20. No frames. And the last item there is about you should be submitting a digital version of the print at the same time that the other images are required. It says 3 weeks there. I think it's actually 2 weeks. But any questions about that before I move on?
Yeah, Steve, I've got a question. This is Mick Richards. You said you can submit 5 digital and 2 prints, so you can submit a total of 7 images once you start the print competition up?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. I talked last time about this new phone category. Obviously, the pictures need to be taken with a smartphone. Doesn't matter what the subject matter is. If you submit a smartphone category, a phone category image, you can submit up to 5 digital images. It's our way of encouraging smartphone images. If you don't submit a smartphone category image, you can submit up to 4. I hope that's not more confusing than it was worth, but that's the current plan. Let me get rid of my phone here. Okay, and just to kind of give the summary about all of the categories, we got the assignment as always, nature, pictorial, and creative as always, and then the phone category. Other programs coming up. Second program in April is Don Trednick presenting about flower photography, and then first Wednesday in May is drone photography, and that'll be in person. Membership renewals. 59 members have paid so far in 2023. There are 14 2022 members who have not renewed so far. Brian's going to be sending out reminders to those people. So hopefully we'll have more paying members. And finally, the Twin Cities Camera Council has their spring break, first in-person one for a long time. There's a link there to all the details, but it's Saturday, March 11, $50. That includes lunch. It's in Spring Lake Park. And some additional information. They'll focus on macro photography and portrait photography, but there's also lots about nature photography. Questions about any of that? Okay. Give me 1 second here. I am going to.
You said this could have been a controlled demolition with the destruction this point patch is presenting. Do you think that might be the intention of some of these politics? Well, it could be. I mean,
So I'm going to move on to our presenter. I put some details in the website about Doug Beasley. The topic is spirituality and photography. I'll let him describe that, but Doug has a great website, and I encourage you to take a look at it. Let me, I'm losing it here. Okay, let me give Doug permission to take over. There it is. Okay, Doug, I just made you a host.
Okay, so now I can screen share when I'm ready.
Whoops, I think I missed. I just made somebody else the host. Who did I make the host? I think I made Steve Cole the host.
Carl, somebody.
Oh, okay. Yep, there he is. Carl, you're going to have to cooperate and not be the host and reject being the host because I pushed the wrong button.
Okay, how do I do that?
Somewhere on the top of your screen, it's going to say that that you're going to stop sharing.
Okay, not there.
I'm sorry, but I think he needs to go to participants and to himself or to the person you want to be the host and make him host or co-host.
I think you're right.
Go to participants.
Yeah.
Douglas, I'm sorry about this.
No worries. It's just part of technology.
Yep.
Security participants.
You'll see a list of participants when you click on the bottom of this. Click participants in the bottom of the screen.
Okay, there I am. Okay, I see that.
And
Yeah.
you'll right click on, or the little 3 dots you can click on, and you should have the chance to.
I get pin and unnamed when I click on it.
Try
Yeah.
clicking on Doug Beasley.
Easily make host. Yes, how about that?
Okay,
All right.
so Doug, I guess you can just talk, or you can share a screen if
Yeah,
If
I'll
that helps
start
you.
sharing in a minute, but I'll
okay.
just want to say hello to everybody and thanks for having me, and thanks, Steve, for diligently pursuing me to get all the information he needed. Chasing around artists is not fun. So thank you for hanging in there.
Mhm.
And yeah, thanks everyone for being here. I want to really encourage questions as we go, or dialogue questions about anything. I'm not a I was gonna say I'm not a technical photographer, but I am, in that I'm very well versed in the materials and believe that you should get to know your camera and the process and even some of the history of photography. But having said that, I think that there's amazing images made with iPhones and plastic toy cameras and whatever anyone uses. And now with cameras, with a basic camera, it's really leveled the playing field quite a bit as far as technology goes. And what's always interesting to me, though, is vision and having something to say and having a point of view, and not just photographing what everyone else does because that's what you're supposed to do, but finding your own voice. So that's I'll just say up front, that's my bias, and that's what I'm much more interested in than technically perfect pictures. I'm much more interested in vision and craft and over technique. The cameras are just tools, and they're important tools, but in the end, they're a tool. A little bit about my history in photography. I went to University of Michigan. I have a degree in fine art. Not that that matters, so you need it. Plenty of photographers with degrees in history or whatever else, or dentistry, but anyways, I did happen to go to art school, and that was a great background for me. But I was glad that I also went to a good liberal arts college and had to take a lot of other things other than art. I ended up working as my first job when I moved to the Twin Cities. I live in St. Paul. My very first job out of college was a black and white printer in a darkroom. I called myself a darkroom slave, which basically I was for several years, in a very high-end advertising photography studio. And though I thought advertising was and is the evil empire, it really taught me so much about attention to detail and the craft of photography, far beyond what school could have. I mean, school was a great prep, not for making a living, but in a background in arts, but working actually in the field was amazing. And then after a few years, I went to another place and was a photo assistant at a commercial photography studio. And then I went to another place where I was assisting a fashion photographer, and then went out on my own. And I did commercial photography for a number of years. I started out mainly doing fashion. I fell into it. I called myself the world's most unlikely fashion photographer, but I just fell into it. And it was actually a really creative field, and I enjoyed it in a lot of ways. But from there, after a number of years, I morphed into doing more annual reports and a lot of annual reports for nonprofits, which is really, fell in line more with my beliefs. And I started doing a lot of travel projects for different clients too, as traveling for different medical companies, doing their annual reports, and for graphic design firms and advertising things. And it was pretty amazing life in a lot of ways, high stress. But all the time I was doing my own fine artwork, always. So, but eventually I just started really putting the emphasis on my fine artwork and my teaching, and over getting commercial assignments. And now I rarely do any commercial assignments anymore. And my work, I've been lucky enough to get a lot of grants along the way to support my fine art work. And I've been able to exhibit around the world, and I teach workshops all around the world. So it's been a pretty amazing run. Do you have any questions before we jump in and look at some images? I suppose you want me to say something about spirituality. Good Lord. But anyone out there? Are you guys still awake? Oh,
I'm
you're
here.
probably all muted.
We're still here.
But please do feel free to just jump in with questions whenever you can, just so I think it'll be more interesting. Spirituality is another long-term interest of mine. And I won't get too much into the history of that, although I could, but I think what's maybe more pertinent to us is how did that enter photography? And for me, it was a way of trying to express some of the concepts and ideas I was wrestling with. And I think part of what, for me, what fueled it was not that I had any answers. I wasn't necessarily a specific religion or denomination of anything. I was just one more person out there seeking answers and looking at different ways. And I was I was pretty drawn to Buddhism and Zen. My mother's from Japan, and I don't know if there's a natural proclivity because of that towards Buddhism and Zen. My mom and my parents certainly weren't into that. They were both very agnostic, but in a good way. So to me, it was always this search, and I wanted to integrate my photography with my spiritual quest. And it started by photographing other people's spiritual sites, going to places that other people in other culture considered sacred. And I don't want to say I was documenting it, but I was trying to interpret it rather, because I don't consider myself a documentary photographer either. I have high respect for those that are, so nothing against that, but mine was always more of a fine art interpretive approach. Maybe we'll jump in and just look at some images and I can explain more as we do that. Again, any questions?
Not yet.
Okay, let's see. I'm gonna do screen sharing and let's see if I get to the right place. Let's see. Here we go. Can you all see that so far?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to make that a full page image and then we'll take off from there. So I'm going to show you first, I'm going to start with some images from my very first McKnight photography fellowship I had. It was to explore sacred sites of the Lakota. And because, again, I didn't want to document these sites, I wanted to experience them and see what they felt like rather than what they looked like. I chose to use my 4x5. I had a wooden Japanese field camera. And with this 4x5 camera, I would shoot rather than film, I would shoot 4x5 Polaroid. It was something called Type 55. And it was a type of Polaroid that it was the old peel apart kind, but it would give you a negative. And I love the 4x5 negatives. So I would wash them and preserve them in the field and take them home. And later, well, in the beginning, I had a borrowed 5x7 Elwood enlarger. And I would put this negative in the enlarger and make prints. But later I found I actually had much better results from scanning them, digitally scanning them, and then printing from those, making digital prints from the scans. So it's a 4x5, as you probably know, is a fairly technical medium, but I like that in combination with the Polaroid, which is Oh, it's just filled with serendipity. Every Polaroid is a little bit different, especially with this type 55. It's a gives you the black and white negative with the edges. I love the edges. Here, this image is of a sweat lodge. It was photographed in the winter. But you can see all these Polaroid artifacts in the sky and on the edges around the corner. And a lot of it is meant to be cropped out, but I liked including all that edges. Some of it is just the stuff that creeps in. Some of it is because I was photographing in the winter. And my technical term for it is the goop. The Polaroid goop would freeze on the negatives and create a lot of one-of-a-kind texture. These are prayer flags and a tree at Bear Butte. Yeah. A tree in the Black Hills. All of the Black Hills are very sacred to Native, but to the Lakota people. And then from there, I was just photographing all kinds of things with the Polaroid film and this 4x5 camera, and looking for spiritual connections to my subject matter. And usually they weren't direct. This is ice in Lake Superior, rock and ice. I like how you can't tell the perspective. Some people think it's maybe looking out of an airplane, looking down at one of the Hawaiian Islands, but this rock is actually probably about 5 feet out in front of me. But anyways, I like the fact that you lose track of perspective. I love what's happening on the corners of the Polaroid, and all again, wintertime, so you get this frozen goop that doesn't wash off once it freezes on there, that really changes the image in ways that I really loved. And I would print these very large. These sacred sites, the Lakota ones, originally I was doing like 11 by 14. And these I was doing 30 by 40 inch prints. These, okay, this is another grant that I had. This was about genocide in the landscape, and visiting native places of genocide. And this is where a massacre had occurred, but right now it's a picnic grounds and it's a parking lot. But I'm playing with the concept of, that it's a massacre site, so they start to feel a little bit more like graves, but they're just the posts telling you where you can and can't park. And I purposely, a lot of my work you'll see later is almost all sepia toned, but in this body of work, I wanted to keep it black and white. I didn't want it to feel nostalgic. I didn't want to add the sepia to make it feel old timey at all, because that was far from the point of it. Point was what do these places feel like now? This was along the roadside, another massacre site. I liked how it looked like you're looking into the ground, but really what it is, it's along the roadside where they'd cut in to the hill to make a road, but it gave you this view of looking into the earth. Another massacre site, and I'd have to just go and really feel my way through them. I just would walk around. Sometimes I'd just sit a while, and so sometimes I'll get there and I'll know what it is I want to photograph. A lot of times I have to let it come to me. Just spend a little bit of time there. Here I'm tilting the camera purposely a little too far to throw things out of focus. And this is a church, and I'm obviously it's a funny angle, and it's because this is a church. This is one of the places that smallpox infected blankets were given out. Knowingly infected blankets were given out to Native people, and it ended up killing many more Indians than the wars ever did. So it's kind of an early example of germicidal warfare, chemical warfare. So it was used purposely to, and these were Indians too that we're not at war with. These were native people that had already seceded their land, and they'd agreed to be on a reservation, and they were still, and part of the deal when giving up their land, they got a number of blankets, and they purposely infected the blankets with smallpox before they handed them out. So it's a pretty sad thing, and that's why the reason I'm giving you this history is I don't mean it to be a history lecture, but I'm saying that information informed my skewing of the horizon line, my tilting of the camera, my using out of focus elements. Look. Now we've jumped over to Ireland. This is a rock in a holy well. That was very out of place because now we're back to a place of genocide where this warrior's bones is supposedly still on top of this butte. And again, my choosing to do a very wonky horizon line, and I love sky, so I want to include lots of sky and little ground. And this was another grant I had of what was this one? This was about our relationship to technology and nature and the mix and where it doesn't mix well and how we're losing all our, it was called Disappearing Green Space. Really more than anything about how everything's turning into everything's, all the land is being used or so much of it. And this just happened, the roadside cross just happened to line up with these cell phone towers. And you can see to the left of the two towers, to the left near the horizon, there's a moon. So I call it Moonrise over cell phone towers, my homage to Ansel, Ansel Adams, who I, of course, appreciate so much. Back in Ireland, these are some standing stones in front of Crowpatrick, which is Ireland's holy mountain. I was lucky enough to go to Ireland a number of times to teach workshops. This is in Door County, Wisconsinites. This was looked very much like a native spiritual place, but it's actually a surveyor's flag where they're marking where they're turning these beautiful woods into another golf course. And this is near, although I live in St. Paul, I have a cabin in Wisconsin I've had for a long time. And this is driving around in the winter. It's called Snowy Road. I print it very large. And the texture on there is again from that Polaroid goop drying on the negative before I could wash it. And it left this texture, which at first I thought ruined the negative, but now I've come to love what it adds. So sometimes you just have to embrace those kind of imperfections. This is a storm approaching the Badlands. I work a lot in the Badlands of South Dakota. And this guy, I got very interested in how the trash, plastic bags get caught in the trees and they get caught in a barbed wire, and how sometimes those things can be that are trash, and I understand they're not good, but they're also sometimes very beautiful, you know, and maybe late in the afternoon when they're backlit, they can be just gorgeous. I call them American prayer flags, all our plastic bags caught up in things. And so that started me. I was trying to get funding to do a project on American prayer flags, and I never did get the funding. But it just had me thinking a lot too on how long do we pursue a project, if other people aren't interested or if there isn't funding, I think there's all kinds of great examples in photography of people that pursued their projects, whether other people wanted to see them or not, and they're wonderful projects. For me, I often have a hard time deciding whether to continue, if it gets turned down for funding, once you should keep going with it as long as it's interesting to you. But sometimes if you get turned down 2 or 3 times, it may be time to think about something else, or do you stick to it? I think it just depends on how interested you are in that subject, how important it is to you. I pretty much moved on. This is a wonderful example of breaking a rule. This is Lake Michigan, and there's nothing in the picture. There's no, my understanding previously was we needed something to anchor, something for our eye to land on. Our eye looks around the picture and wants that landing place, a rock or a dock or a boat or a horizon line or something. And this has none of those. And in the end, it's what I really liked about this picture is that there is no landing place for your eye. You just keep searching, maybe much like my quest in spirituality. You just keep looking. It's not about finding, it's about the looking. I've always been interested in photographing people too. So portrait work, even working with a figure, has always been intermixed with my work. This was at my cabin in Wisconsin. And here, to me, what I love, the spirituality in this comes from her looking up into the light. But it's really just a very practical reason how this happened. I like the juxtaposition of her wearing this velvet dress in the water. The light was really modeled on her face. It was not very pleasant. But when I had her just raise her chin up and into the light struck on her face just beautifully. And that's why I did it. But then after, or maybe as it happened, I realized that it gave it this other dimension to the picture. But the original impulse was just to get nicer light in her face. This one I call the gift. She's presenting these rocks to me that she found. I love rocks, and she's presenting these rocks. We're in the Badlands, and these rocks she's picked up along the roadside. This is photographed 4x5 on film, and I also love the metaphor of a road. So we've got the road going behind her, and I use roads a lot, roads and paths, as a metaphor. And metaphors are really, really important to me in my work, including metaphors. This was Borobudur. This is in Indonesia. This is part of another grant I had on sacred places around the world. And I guess what's significant about it to me is this is the largest Buddhist monument in the world. I was far, far from home, but I ended up photographing it with a plastic toy camera, which really felt like it worked for me. Part of it felt sacrilegious a little bit at the time, because of how far I'd come and how important this work was to me at the time, and then to use this little throwaway plastic camera. But sometimes the tools can be important in how they define what your vision is. And I like the dreamlike quality. You can see the edges are vignetting and it's not quite sharp, especially on the edges. I love that about the plastic toy cameras. And other thing I'll mention is everything I do is on film. I'm still 100% film based. Well, I should say my personal work is 100% film based. The work I do for clients is digital, usually. Because they want access to the files, and it's just a lot easier and cleaner to turn files over to them. But Everything I do is film based. And it's not that I think film is better than digital. It's just my choice of tools. You know, digital is wonderful. Digital printing, I think, is amazing. My normal process now is I photograph on Kodak Tri-X film. This, by the way, is in Ireland. This is a ancient burial site called a dolmen. Again, photograph with a plastic toy camera. You can really see, like, if you look at the bottom right edge, the way it loses sharpness, and then the top two corners, the way it vignettes. It's typical plastic cameras. But it was my normal process is to start with Kodak Tri-X film, usually shot in my Hasselblad. Then I have that film hand processed, contact sheets made, and from there I pick out the ones I want scanned. And we make in my office, with someone else's help, they come in and they make we make very high resolution scans, and then I make digital print. So I do maintain a dark room, but I haven't been in it for years. I love digital printing. We've got an Epson, so I can anything 17 by 22 or smaller. I print in the office. Anything bigger, often for exhibits, I'll go bigger than that, and then I'll have somebody else. But I'll outsource the printing. This rock, this was at Wounded Knee, a native massacre site. And I found the rock and stuck it in the barbed wire. So I guess for a lot of photographers, that's kind of a no-no. Like if you were a documentary photographer, if you were there for National Geographic, you can't alter the scene. If I'm a newspaper, magazine photographer, you don't alter what you're photographing. I found the rock and stuck it in their barbed wire as a tribute to what had happened there, and walked away, and then realized, wait a minute, I'm a photographer, I should go back and photograph it. But I don't have any problem with the fact that I put it there and then photographed it. That's my prerogative as an artist. But again, just trying to differentiate between that and being a documentary photographer. This is a horse in the Badlands. This has been my best-selling print of all time. And this happened too by accident. You know, what I've learned is to say yes to things. Should I stop the car? Yes. Should I pull over here? Yes. Should I get out? Yes. Should I walk over that hill? Yes. You know, if it comes up, the answer is usually yes. Anyways, we saw these horses off the side of the road, and I went, and the light was so beautiful. I photographed 3 horses in this beautiful light, but it was fairly mundane. And I walked in close, and horses are curious, so they come closer instead of running away. And I made a photograph of 2 horses standing in this beautiful light. And then, because they didn't run away, I made a photograph of 1 horse standing in this light. When I got down to 1 horse, I saw the barbed wire running in front of him. So I moved in even closer to crop out the barbed wire. And that's when this became much more abstract and much more spiritual. So all I'm really trying to say is that I'm not the kind of, I don't have the genius or forethought to make this image from the beginning. I had to stumble into it, but I allow myself the time and energy and the space to just allow myself to work towards that. And I know for me, that's more my process. Sometimes I know the image right away, but I can't tell you how often the image that I thought was the really good image that I just saw immediately, that turns out to be something I don't even use later, but it might be the one after that that I don't even remember taking of something off to the side. That's the most interesting one. I don't know. It's a mysterious process, photography, isn't it? And I do admire and respect those photographers so much that just know what they're doing. They go after it and they're decisive. I need to look around and stumble around and try things. This was on a road trip in the South, and we had gotten a guidebook on the handmade graves of freed slaves, and that was so fascinating. And this is Evam. This is in Peru. I taught some workshops there a couple of times, working with shamans in Peru. So this is during a shaman ceremony. And here, what I love, we're back to the Hasselblad. And this is a scan of an actual darkroom print. I love what the smoke is doing to her face and the way it obscures her face. It's a bull at a ceremony. And to me, the spiritual feeling came from getting in close to it and getting low to the ground with the bull looking up. That changed things. As opposed to looking just at it, it's showing me something, I feel. I like the hand off to the left edge too, and that bit of rope. This was hiking on a trail, I think it was near Machu Picchu. I had a chance and yes. Was there a question? A chance encounter with this little girl. And I think sometimes, we take time and we try to connect with people and get to know something about them. And other times, I spent probably 10 seconds with this little girl. We made eye contact on the trail and I stopped and I just held up my camera, indicating I wanted to make a picture of her, and she nodded. And then I asked her, I pointed into the lens and asked her to look right there. And she has the most beautiful, intense stare into the camera and a click of the shutter, and we both go off our different ways. And I think we can deeply connect in that one solitary moment. It's possible. I feel that with her. This is my friend Jesus, and this was on a floating reed island at Lake Titicaca. Pretty amazing. And I love this soft, feminine Jesus. This is a shaman ending. This is at Machu Picchu, and the shaman's ending the ceremony by throwing these cocoa leaves up in the air. And I love how they caught the light. And for me, this was an example of just being prepared. I wanted to participate in the ceremony, but before I did, I pre-focused my Hasselblad, because there's no autofocus and auto anything, and Hasselblads are completely manual. So I pre-focused, I set the aperture and shutter speed to what I thought would be right, and then just set the camera aside and participate in the ceremony. When he did that, it was completely unexpected, but I was able to just pull up the camera and press the shutter. I didn't have to pre-focus. I didn't have to focus or take a light reading or anything else. It was just everything was ready. So this is sunrise of the new millennium. Sunrise, solstice sunrise of the new millennium. I'm not a morning person, but every 100 years or so, it's worth getting up for one. Now we're in Guatemala. I teach workshops in Guatemala. I've been there 20 times. It's one of my favorite places in the world. And spirituality is so alive there. It's one of the places that the Spaniards, when they conquered Central America, for some reason, the Mayans were able to keep their own culture and dress and spirituality. So in many places, you'll have, like on a town square, there'll be a Mayan temple on one end of the square and a Catholic church on the other. And many of the Mayans, they'll worship at both. They don't see that as a problem at all. They freely go back and forth between both.
Page 3, the other one, it seems like I'm company there, like, oh
There are a number of people that are not muted. Can we let Doug do the presentation and everybody else check and make sure you are muted?
Yeah, if that was a question for me, sorry, I could not hear it at all.
I think it was just background noise, so
Okay, thank you.
apologize.
Thank you. This is a Mayan man in a temple preparing an offering. There's several people in the background that you can kind of make out. But I love how they're obscured by smoke. Smoke is such a wonderful thing, right? Us photographers, we love smoke and fog, things that obscure detail. I think because they help add a sense of mystery. So often at photography, we think so much is often about what we can see, the details, but I think it's also just as much or more about what we can't see, and sometimes hinting at things, or it's the path that goes around the bend to where we can't see anymore, creates that sense of wanting to know, where does that path go? When there's fog, we want to know what's behind the fog. So smoke and fog are wonderful tools to add mystery. Another Mayan man preparing an offering. And this is a Catholic procession in the town of Antigua, just after dark. It's a blurry image, and I kind of like it that way. It's slightly blurry. It's handheld after dark. Yes, I could use a tripod and get a clear image. I could use a flash and freeze everything. But I think either of those choices, to me, I'd lose some of the spirit of the image. I'd lose some of the feeling of the image to get a more perfect image. To me, it might show you more, but I would feel it less. To me, this is more, has the feeling of being there at this exotic to me and mysterious place after dark, with this wonderful procession going through the streets. I don't need to see it lit up with every detail. That was not my experience. This was at another ritual place outside. This is a Mayan man at the funeral of his son. They'd just taken his son's coffin out of the pickup truck. This was kind of a very sensitive moment. And I just waited with my camera. I held it up and made eye contact with him and held up my camera, and he nodded yes, that it was okay. So I do want to get permission too. I don't want to be an uninvited guest or an obtrusion in these people's lives. I want my photography to be an honoring of them. So it is very important that I get permission. And if people don't want me there, they don't want me to photograph, I won't. And what I don't like is the people that stand off onto the sides with a big long lens, are just poaching shots without any permission. They're not really wanted there. It's like they're stealing things. But if you come up and you approach people directly, I think for me, it's a much more honest way to make pictures. And there's many different approaches. That's what works for me. So this is the Day of the Dead. Now we're in Japan. This is a torii gate at Miyajima, which translates to Shrine Island. These are made with a Pentax Bikina Plauble 6x7 film cameras. So medium format still, but not the Hasselblad that I normally use. I wanted to go, something told me in Japan I should go with a different format. So I wanted a landscape format, a 6x7. So a little bigger negative too. You get 10 images on a roll instead of 12 that you get with a Hasselblad. So they're the same width, but a little bit longer. This is an island where my mother's from. And it was, there's an orange left as an offering there. The seaside. And just imagine people have come there for hundreds of years or maybe thousands to leave their offerings by the sea. This is a bamboo grove between two temples. And they just happened to fall like that. This was such an amazing find to me because I had wandered off behind the little inn that we were staying. I'd wandered up the hill. I was trying to get reception on my cell phone to make a call, and hidden in the forest was this temple. And no one around. It was so beautiful. No, that's back to Ireland. And now we're in Hawaii. I had an exhibit there at a gallery on the Big Island, and they brought in this Zen priest to bless the gallery before the opening. And I thought that was wonderful to have a blessing. And the reason, I'm not a very conceptual photographer, but I saw him as a man standing between two worlds, standing in the middle. So I asked him to come and stand in the middle of the road and purposely stand in that yellow line is symbolic of his place between worlds. He lives in Honolulu, and here he was in this little tiny town in the Big Island to bless the gallery. This is a giant monkey pod tree over the Japanese cemetery outside of Hilo. And this is back to a plastic toy camera. Wakaka Falls. I've made this print as big as 4 feet by 4 feet from a little tiny plastic toy camera negative, and it actually looked pretty good. My friend Franco Selmaragi, great photographer in Hawaii. I would use his hand. He has these big, beautiful hands, and I'd use his hands quite a bit holding things. There's Franco's hand again on the lava. This is up near the top of the active volcano, and it's actually fog, the smoke and fog coming up from the volcano. And a bowl of pihi shells that a ceramist uses. Clayton Amamea, the wonderful ceramicist, uses these shells to prop up his teacups to fire them. And the pihi shells give off salt, and they add a natural glaze to his work. But I thought just the bowl of shells was so beautiful. Now to China, where I've been teaching workshops until the pandemic. I think I went 9 times. And what I loved about China, it's similar to Japan, of course, and yet it's so different. Just something that's so much more rustic and ancient in a different way. Japan can be very ancient too, but China has so many more rough edges. It's really a photographer's delight. And I just came across this man doing calligraphy. Of course, asked him for permission. And, a lot of times, people say, well, if you ask for permission, then people smile at you, whoever. But I let them do that. If I ask for permission, he says yes, and he smiles for the camera. I don't want that smiley picture, but I will make that smiley picture. I will take it and then thank him, and then he'll go back to what he's doing, but you have permission to photograph. Rather than try to explain in a language that I can't understand or he can't understand why I don't want a happy smiley picture. Make that picture and then move on. This was just a shrine, a little shrine on a hike back in the mountains. I'm fascinated by those little, very homemade shrines that people leave. Hiking in the mountains. I love this telephone pole. Also, I love telephone poles for the symbol of the cross. Another metaphor. They're not meant to be the symbol of a cross, and yet by how you choose to see them, they certainly can be. That's a powerful symbol and powerful metaphor. We went to a Muslim village in China, and this is the Quran left open, where kids were studying. I like to use very shallow depth of field, you can see, so I purposely let a lot of things fall out of focus. And this is the Road to Red Cloud's grave in South Dakota. If I was laying on the ground, I was laying on my stomach and photographing, and I like how we look up to the gate. There's that sense of mystery. We look through the gate and we have no idea what's on the other side. If I just stood up and photographed straight into the cemetery, it really looks like any normal cemetery. But getting this other angle gave it the mystery that I needed it to have. This was in Cuba a long time ago, before it was legal to go there. I was able to kind of sneak in, and what a fascinating place. I'd rented a room from a family, and this was on the stairway walking up to my room, and there was something about that solitary light bulb that was illuminating the hallway that I found a very spiritual presence. And I've done this series that I call accidental ensos. And enso in Japanese, it's usually a brush stroke. It's a Zen thing, and it's a circle drawn with a single brush stroke. And it's a symbol of, it means both everything and nothing. And I like that duality. So I started photographing what I call accidental ensos, things that aren't meant to, that I see as ensos, but weren't meant to be ensos, but they become that. And this is purposely just a little out of focus. I focused on the wood behind it. I'm sure when I did this shot, I probably did it both ways, both with it in focus and the wood behind it out of focus, but I liked it just set up this little bit. It's like a little bit of distortion. It's like listening to Jimi Hendrix play guitar, and there's a little distortion from seeing that just slightly out of focus. And this one's very sharp. Again, from the series Accidental Ensos. This I was photographing in the Hopi Reservation, doing a project for them. And near our hotel was a 55-gallon drum sitting outside. And they moved the drum to rake around it. And it left this beautiful impression of an enso. So I stopped the guys who were raking before they raked over it so I could make this photograph. The Lake Superior by Plastic Toy Camera. I was trying to emulate Sally Gall. She's the most beautiful picture of a wave. And I was trying to copy her wave picture. I was so moved, and I failed miserably, but ended up making my own picture in the process, I guess. This has been another popular image of mine, just in terms of print sales and things. What's happening here is she had scooped that leaf up. She'd floated a scarf on the water and then put her hands underneath and scooped up that leaf. That's so beautiful. So it's not a double exposure. I'm not that sophisticated. Okay, now it's not letting me advance. Oh, there we go. This is along the ocean in Maine. I thought it was just to remind me of like giving birth or something. I love the way she's facing. I guess you don't know she's facing the ocean, but I do. I feel its presence. This image was made on 9/11. And I was in Oregon. I was coming home from an exhibit in Hawaii and changing planes. And that's when 9/11 happened. And I couldn't fly out. I went to this place called Sauvie Island and saw this flag flying at half mast. And because, no one really knew it was happening yet, just the weirdness of everything, I put it at an angle. You can see from the trees, the pole is actually straight up and down, but I tilted the camera to create that angle. And then I took my lens hood on the Hasselblad and turned it a quarter turn so the lens hood would vignette the corners, because I thought that added some of that feeling of unknowingness that was happening all around us. And I think portraits can be very spiritual. There's a connection that we can have with people that goes deeper than skin, flesh. I feel like we can just enter this whole other world through our eyes. It's this wonderful portal. I'm standing on a bridge outside of Taos, New Mexico, and the wind, the sun, I love the backlight, and there was this ferocious wind blowing her hair. And I just chose a shutter speed to just let us feel some of that movement, but without having her face blurry. This was actually for a CD cover. There's the metaphor of the road. Portrait of a friend. I backed him up into this bush. Poor guy, but he was great about it. This is at Brighton Bush Hot Springs in Oregon. This was this man is Charles Bates. He's it was for a magazine article, and the article was about him both as a businessman and as a yogi and meditation teacher. He was very well known yogi and meditation teacher, but he's also a businessman. And I'm trying to do a portrait that shows both sides of him. So that's why I had him close his eyes. And I've got that low angle and making him look like he's leaning back a little, although he's not. Just trying to show two different sides of the same person. My friend Bill in Ireland, I asked him to take his shirt off and get under this barbed wire, and he was such a great model. He was a friend that was on the workshop with me, but he was just such a great model. And in his early 80s, I think he's probably 80 there. In his early 80s, he started coming to the Badlands as one of our nude models. He started his nude modeling career at age 81, I think. He came with us a number of years and loved it. And we were just so lucky. He was everyone's favorite model. I mean, what an opportunity. Ex-priest and one of the most intelligent, compassionate people I've ever met. There's Bill again. Actually, this was photographed in an old jailhouse in a little town in scenic South Dakota. And Bill again, this is his feet. I thought it was, I don't think I was photographing it this way at first, but I saw it later as kind of a crucifixion scene, the way his feet are crossed. And I think I felt it at the time, but I don't know if I was cognitive of it. This is a plastic toy camera again. My friend Simone at the cabin. Here I was playing on plastic toy camera. I was playing with how can we feel a person's energy without them being, usually I photograph my portraits pretty up close. You've seen, I like those close up in your face kind of portraits. And here this was somebody, she was a very dear friend, so I was very close to her, but I'm trying to feel her energy purposely from a further distance. So just playing with that concept. Portraits of friends. This was sand on his hands, this fine silt that you get in the Badlands. Again, my love of shallow depth of field. A portrait of my intern. I do play a lot with eyes open, intense eye contact, and then eyes closed too. I go back and forth between those. This is in Hawaii. Another commercial assignment. This woman was a painter in her 90s, most lovely woman. I had such a great time with her. Beautiful hands. I love photographing hands. Oh, and leads me to we're almost done. Hopefully you guys are still hanging in there. Hope you're okay. It's hard to know without getting any feedback. I did a series of self-portraits. There's self-portraits because it is my hand holding these objects. But I think for me, the self-portrait comes more in the metaphor of what I'm doing or what I'm holding. This I call self-portrait as enso. Again, that Japanese normally painted circle that means everything and nothing. This is self-portrait as twig. I loved how fragile and delicate that twig was. I'm trying to imagine that's a part of who I am as well. There's the road in the background in this one you can barely make out, but probably tell by seeing my other work, that's a road that goes back around the bend. This I call grasping self-portrait. So those are from a much larger series. And then I do some very allegorical self-portraits. This is self-portrait as empty boat in Norway. So I'm not physically in the picture at all, yet I very much consider this a self-portrait. And I do consider self-portrait because I was conscious of that fact as I was making it. So I become the empty boat. Or you could also say I become the ocean as well. And this is another example of that. This is self-portrait as moon over Badlands. I like the tension often of putting things right in the middle of a picture, right where we know not to. But when it's done intentionally, it has a power that's very different than if you don't know to move it out of the center. So I play with that. And I threw in a few panoramics because I got really enamored with panoramics for a while. And I would probably still be if my panoramic camera hadn't gotten stolen. Here's another example of one just after dusk. So I'm hand holding at a longer shutter speed, so that's where the blur comes from. But I like that. And this is from I got this plastic camera that's a panoramic camera, and it was my first time using it. You're supposed to wind it to every other frame. And I forgot that. So I just wound it one frame at a time, even though it takes 2 frames wide. So to overlap, so the whole roll of film just overlaps. And this was a section of that I took out. And I really like, I just kind of like what happened. Felt like the crosses at Calvary. On the left is a man bowing, but really it's another photographer making a picture. It was a lucky accident, and I've printed the whole strip. And this was just a fun picture for me. It was after the first time I taught at Santa Fe workshops. And I just had the most amazing week and a great group of students, and just a great week. And the class is over, and 15 minutes later, I went back to my classroom to get something, and there it's all swept away in the trash already. It's just that another great reminder that you just keep moving on. You can't hold on to anything really. So I love that. And that's what I've got for you. Hello, is anyone still awake?
We're still awake. Steve here. I love the journey listening to you and seeing your images. And I love that it was not a technical presentation, that it's okay to have blur and autofocus. And it also occurs to me that
Yes.
many of us on this call started with film and started with cameras where you manually focused and manually set the exposure. And so it was a nice reminder about that.
I see somebody's asking about if I run workshops locally. Not that often, but last year I did teach one at the I taught one for the photo group out of Madison, Wisconsin, and we did that in the Driftless region. That was a wonderful experience. And I also teach, I've been teaching at Wild Rice Retreat up in Bayfield. And I do have an online class. Actually, it's starting in starting next week, but I have an 8-week online class called Touching the Divine, a spiritual approach to photography. So that's, if you're interested, you can just check that out on my website. It's douglasbeasley.com. Somebody else I'm seeing, what techniques do you use to get the extremely short depth of field? I try to use my lenses as close to wide open as I can. You know, in a Hasselblad, they're usually an f4 lens. It's not a 2.8 or 1.8 or anything like you can have on a DSLR. But usually an f4 is as wide open as they'll get with Hasselblad. But that will, and then I'm often using a 120 lens, which is just a slight telephoto. It would be like a 70 millimeter on a DSLR. So that in combination with f4 will, and the closer you get, remember that depth of field, shallow depth of field comes from 3 things. Here's the technical part. Comes from the length of your lens. So the longer the lens, the shallower the depth of field at any aperture. The wider the lens, the more depth of field you get. It comes from the choice of aperture. So the larger aperture, smaller number, larger aperture gives you more depth of field. And a smaller aperture gives you more depth of field. So the more you go towards f16, you get more. The more you go towards 2.8, you get less. I try not to think of it as better or worse. I just think of it as more or less. But the third factor that most people don't realize is close distance to subject. So the closer you get to your subject, the shallower the depth of field becomes. So the same lens length and the same aperture, as you move in closer, depth of field gets shallower. As you move back, depth of field gets greater.
I'll pull a reference to this online course when I post this recording on our YouTube page, so everybody will have access to that.
I have a
Uh,
question for Doug that doesn't really get into the chat as easily as it might.
Yeah, sure.
Um, I love the travelogue work that you did, capturing the people and the places.
Thank you.
And I think I didn't have my mic on when you caught that beautiful young woman in Peru, because I too have been to Peru, and pictures like that are there everywhere. All you have to do is stop, and there they are, and they're marvelous. They reminded me of some of my own. But I'd like you to take us back to the first few that you showed us, that where you were shooting images with a spiritual message inside those images, and the qualities of the image pretty much toss out all the rules that we talk about in our salons. So if you were telling someone how to look at one of those images and appreciate it, what would you tell, and pick one from whatever, the first 10 images you showed us. If you were to pick one of those and say, okay, here's how I might suggest you look at this image to see the things that I saw when I made it. Can you answer that?
I'll try to. I would say you just start by trying to feel it, to let go of, I mean, as photographers, we are interested, and I can look at other people's work too, and I want to know technically what they did to get that. So I understand that. But I would say first, just try to feel it, and what is the feeling that's there, and what does that come from? And then what are the techniques that help put that feeling forward? But it starts with the feeling. And I also think one of the cruxes of photography, and something I play with, is how do you both see your subject and make your subject stand out and make your subject important, as far as isolating it from the background, and yet sense and the whole frame at the same time. It's this funny balancing act. We need to see the subject, and yet we need to sense the whole frame at the same time. And that's the that's the conundrum of photography in some ways, I think. And
Do you have other photographers who do this kind of work that you really admire?
Yes. Well, Sally Mann, I don't know if she does. I mean, she's just a photo hero, photo god of mine. I love Sally Mann's work. Sally Gall is another photographer I really like. Heath Carter, amazing photographer. There's so many great photographers out there. Yeah, so many great. I mean, it's overwhelming how much great photography is out there. It can be kind of daunting too. And I'm also the publisher of Shots Magazine, and I see so much great photography that sometimes it's almost makes me want to put the camera away, not out of like, oh, I'll never be as good as them, but just kind of in deference to how much great work is produced. And sometimes I think we just, do we need to see another image of mine? And then the reason why I need to keep making them is just strictly for me. It's not because the world needs them or anyone else needs to see them, but maybe I need to keep expressing myself. But I'm just in awe of how many great photographs and great photographers are out there.
I think that's a really, really important message is you're taking the photographs because you have to.
Right. Right. And I'm not serving anyone else at that time, and that I don't think that it's an important, again, if I was maybe a documentary photographer or covering war, famine, or something else, those are really important for people to see. But the work that I'm doing, it's not really that important for anyone else to see it. I mean, if people do and they enjoy it, that's great. And that's also a conundrum, at the same time, I need to, maybe I shouldn't say need, but there's a desire, there has been, it's really mostly gone away, but that desire to get my work published or seen or exhibited versus just being, and I spent a lot of my younger years, trying to get my work out there, and I was lucky to have some success. But of course, we look around us and there's always people that have a lot more success, and we compare ourselves negatively to them, right? But I've got to a point where I'm just not as interested in making sure other people see my work. I'm just trying to live my life and hopefully still make some good pictures. But I think it's also because of the magazine. I really am interested in showcasing the work of others. There's so much great work out there.
And tell us again about what's the name of the magazine?
It's called Shots Magazine. It's a black and white quarterly printed publication. It's been around for 40 some years now. It was my favorite magazine for many years, a longtime subscriber, and I've been the owner and publisher for probably the last maybe 7 years or something. Here's can you see that? Here's a recent issue. Other one. So quarterly, black and white. Every issue has a theme, and we announce the theme, and then people submit on that theme. So sometimes it might be self-portraits or water, or every now and then there's an open theme. The new theme coming, this one is myth and memory. The one that's coming up is double vision. So it's about diptychs and double exposures. But every issue has a theme, and then if you're a subscriber, you can submit for free to that theme. And with the editor, we pick our favorites and publish them. And it's distributed worldwide. We've got a small but very loyal following around the world, so that's really fun. So every issue, there's photographers from Europe and Asia and all kinds of places.
I'll try to find a link to that to include in this meeting summary also.
Shotsmag.com.
Other questions? So again, Doug, this has been great. I really appreciate the presentation and feel inspired to try to apply some of this feeling to my work going forward. So this has been wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
One question, Doug, is
Yes.
almost everything is black and white or sepia tone. Do you do anything in color, or is your personal expression more driven in black and white?
Really,
format?
pretty much black and white. I've played with colors. I've certainly done a lot of color for clients, in my commercial career. Personal work, every now and then I'll play with it. Like maybe I'll do a project with plastic toy cameras and color film or something, but it's never been more than just a passing fancy. I've never taken color that seriously, but I do appreciate other photographers working. I mean, Alex Soth is a great example of a legendary Midwestern photographer that works all in color. I love his work, and there's so many great photographers. So it's not that I don't appreciate color, I do, but my vision just lends itself to black and white. Every time I think I'll try something else, or maybe I just naturally see in black and white, I think. And maybe it's a limitation or maybe it's a blessing. I don't know, but yeah.
You mentioned some other photographers whose work you like.
Mhm.
Do you have a print that you particularly like of any of those photographers that you purchased and you have hanging on the wall?
No, I wish. I'd love to have. If you have any prints of any of those people I mentioned, please
I
forward them
know.
to me.
I know they're
I'll trade you for
expensive.
some Shots magazines.
The other thing that you said that I thought was really interesting was about the whole process of turning these images into prints,
Mhm.
which we so seldom do now, and even the big
Right,
prints. And
right.
what does that mean for you when you take an image like that and
I
turn it
love to
into a
see how
print?
they look. There's a whole, you develop a relationship with your work and with the prints. It's so different than when they just exist on the screen. I love seeing prints. And it's thrilling to me to see a print come out of the printer, just like most of us remember a print coming up in the fix, coming up in the developer, and then you turn the lights on after it's in the fix, and there's a magic to that. But I also think that your work has a lot to teach you and a lot to show you when you see it printed. You will learn if you pick out 10 prints of your work, 10 images and make prints of your work, I guarantee you'll learn a lot from it. And I think that's a really valuable step that so many of us don't take. And I haven't done it since the pandemic. I was printing so much from before the pandemic because I was having exhibits, and as I travel around to workshops, I'd bring prints to show the students and so on. And with the pandemic, I didn't have, without having exhibits and other things going on, I stopped printing, and I really missed seeing my work in print. So I need to fire up that Epson and get going again. So yeah, I think it's very valuable. The other thing I encourage people to do, you don't have to have a great printer. Print out your work, make 20 prints on typing paper with an office printer and pin them up, not for exhibit, not for other people, but just pin them up in your office or whatever room you use to work out of or wherever, and just live with them for a bit. They'll teach you things. They'll show you things. I promise.
Yeah, don't just print them and put them in a box. That's
Yeah,
a
live with
mistake.
them. Yeah, it's amazing what you'll learn. Other questions?
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation, and hearing these images, seeing these images and seeing how you see them. And I hope you'll come back and help us see more deeply into our own images.
Yeah, well, thank you. Maybe we'll organize a workshop sometime or something. So, or come join me somewhere. But the main thing is just keep working on your own work. And the other thing I'd say too is, as far as looking at the work of others, I think that's important, but only when you're looking for inspiration. There's a time when I look at the work of others and I beat myself up because why aren't I that good, or why aren't I doing this or that? Then that's not the time to be looking. But when I look with awe and look with admiration and get inspired from work, that's a great time to look at work. But as soon as I start comparing myself or beating myself up for not being who they are, as good as them, then it's time to just, what is that saying? Eyes in your own plate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, thank you, Douglas. It's been wonderful. I'm going to wrap it up and shut down the Zoom call, and I'll share it with everyone tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here. Appreciate it. Thanks for showing up tonight.
Yep. Goodbye.
Night.
Thanks a lot.